Are you out of your mind? Lisa's voice barely broke a whisper, yet it shattered the heavy silence of the royal chambers. David, the Alpha King, didn't flinch. He stood by the hearth, the firelight catching the golden sweat on his chest, while Elena, Lisa's own flesh and blood, pulled the silk sheets higher to cover her naked shoulders. Elena didn't look away. She smiled, a tiny, venomous curve of her lips. "It's not what you think, Lisa," David rumbled, his command alpha-laced, expecting her to yield. "You're right," Lisa said, stepping back as the mate bond in her chest snapped with a violent, physical crack. "It's exactly what I see." She had caught the Alpha King cheating with her own sister, and she would never let them forget it. The scent of the room was what Lisa would remember most. It wasn't just the heavy musk of David, a scent of rain and pine that had once meant home, safety, and eternal belonging. It was intertwined with the suffocatingly sweet vanilla of Elena's perfume, overlaid with the sharp, metallic tang of raw betrayal. It smelled like a slaughterhouse hidden beneath a bed of roses. For a full minute, the three of them were frozen in a macabre tableau. Lisa stood in the doorway, her hand still resting on the brass handle. She had come to surprise David after a week-long diplomatic mission to the Eastern Pax, bringing him a treaty that secured their borders. Instead, she had found her borders violently breached from the inside. "Lisa," David said, his voice dropping an octave. It was the tone he used on unruly generals, a vibrational hum meant to force submission. He took a step toward her, entirely unashamed of his nakedness. The arrogance of the Alpha King ran so deep, it eclipsed his guilt. "Close the door. We will discuss this like adults." "Discuss?" Lisa's voice was devoid of tears. The shock was too absolute, too freezing, to allow for something as warm as crying. Elena shifted on the bed, letting the silk sheet slip just enough to reveal the red mark on her collarbone. A mark David had put there. "Don't be dramatic, Lisa," Elena purred, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You knew this was coming. The pack needs a Luna who can bear an heir. You've had 3 years. I'm only giving the king what he requires." The words struck Lisa like physical blows, targeting the deepest, most agonizing insecurity she harbored. The healers had said it was stress, that the moon goddess would bless them in time. David had held her hands, kissed her forehead, and sworn it didn't matter. He was a liar. Lisa looked at the man she had bound her soul to. The mate bond, a glowing, ethereal thread in her mind, was currently thrashing, burning black at the edges. "Is that what this is, David? State business?" David stopped a few feet from her. His jaw ticked. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine remorse crossed his hardened features, but it was quickly swallowed by his pride. Elena's wolf is prime. The elders have been whispering. "I am the king, Lisa. I cannot be seen as weak. I didn't want to hurt you, but the lineage must be secured." "So you bedded my sister?" Lisa's tone was terrifyingly flat. "In our chambers. It is a biological necessity." David snapped, his patience fraying. "You will remain Luna in title. Elena will be my chosen breeder. It is done in other packs. You will accept this." He didn't ask. He commanded. The raw weight of his alpha aura slammed into the room, a pressure designed to force her to her knees. Elena smirked, expecting her sister to fold. Lisa had always been the diplomat, the gentle peacekeeper, the soft Luna who balanced David's iron fist. But as the aura hit her, something inside Lisa didn't bend. It shattered. And from the shards of her broken heart, a terrifying, icy clarity emerged. She raised her left hand, The Luna ring, a massive diamond set in ancient silver, felt suddenly like a shackle. I, Lysa, daughter of the Crescent, reject you, David, Alpha King of the Silver Mane, she spoke. The words were ancient, heavy with power, and the moment they left her lips, the room's temperature plummeted. David's eyes widened in sheer panic. Lysa, stop! You don't know what you're doing. I sever the bond. I return your mark. I strip myself of your name. I command you to stop, David roared, lunging forward. He was too late. Lysa twisted the ring and pulled. It slid off her finger. She didn't throw it at him. Throwing it would imply anger. She simply let it drop. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull, heavy clink that echoed louder than thunder. The mate bond snapped completely. The physical recoil was devastating. Lysa coughed, a spray of crimson blood hitting the pristine white rug. She staggered, clutching her chest as if a sword had been driven through it. But she refused to fall. She forced herself upright, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. David was clutching his own chest, gasping for air, brought to his knees by the sudden, violent amputation of his soulmate. Elena screamed, scrambling back against the headboard as the backlash of the severed bond cracked the mirror across the room. Lysa didn't look at them again. She turned on her heel and walked out the door. The two elite royal guards in the hallway, Marcus and Vance, stood frozen. They had heard the ancient words. They felt the vacuum of power where their Luna had been. Marcus lowered his gaze to the floor, his face pale with shame. Lysa walked past them, bleeding from a wound no one could see, stepping out of the palace and into the freezing, unforgiving night. The rain was a deluge, a freezing torrent that turned the forest floor of the Silver Mane territory into a treacherous slip of mud and sharp stones. Lysa had been running for 6 hours. She hadn't packed a bag. She hadn't taken a coat. She was dressed in the thin, ruined silk of her diplomatic gown, now stained with mud and her own blood. Every few miles, she would violently vomit black bile. A rejected mate bond was a death sentence for most female wolves. The biological shock of tearing a soul in two usually resulted in heart failure within 48 hours. The pain was absolute, a ceaseless roaring fire in her veins that made her bones ache and her vision swim. Keep moving. The voice in her head was no longer the soft, reasoning diplomat. It was a guttural, primal growl. Cross the river. Get out of his lands. She reached the blood-washed river just as dawn threatened to break. The water was swollen, churning with angry gray foam. On the other side lay the Deadlands, a massive, lawless expanse of ruined territory where exiles, murderers, and feral rogues roamed. It was a place where alphas sent wolves to die. Lysa didn't hesitate. She plunged into the freezing rapids. The current slammed into her, pulling her under, but the physical agony of drowning was a welcome distraction from the agony in her chest. She fought with desperate, thrashing strokes, her nails tearing against submerged rocks until she dragged herself onto the opposite bank. She collapsed on the jagged pebbles, gasping, her limbs completely numb. She was in the Deadlands. She was no longer a Luna. She was prey. She lay there for what felt like hours, drifting in and out of consciousness. The rain slowed to a cold drizzle. When she finally opened her eyes, the shadows of the tree line had shifted. They weren't shadows. 3 massive wolves stepped out of the fog. They were a filthy, matted mix of brown and gray, their bodies covered in the jagged, hairless scars of constant survival fighting. Rogues. They didn't have the discipline of a pack. They smelled of rot, desperation, and feral hunger. The largest of the 3, a one-eyed brute with a torn ear, shifted into his human form. He was naked, grimy, and leered at her with yellowing teeth. "Well, well," the rogue sneered, his voice raspy. "Look what the river washed up. You smell like silver and silk, little wolf. You smell like the Silver Fang King." He sniffed the air, his singular eye widening in cruel delight. "But the bond is dead. He threw you away." Lisa tried to stand, but her legs betrayed her. She fell back into the mud. "Don't worry," the rogue laughed, gesturing to his two companions, who remained in wolf form, snapping their jaws. "We'll put you to good use before we eat you." He lunged. Lisa didn't have the strength to fight. The rogue's heavy hand closed around her throat, slamming her head back against the stones. Searing pain flashed behind her eyes. As the rogue's foul breath washed over her face, something deep within the darkest, most forgotten corner of her genetics snapped awake. Her mother had always warned her. "Our bloodline is old, Lisa. Older than the pack's. We keep our wolves small and quiet. Because if the ancient thing wakes up, the world will burn." As the rogue's claws dug into her shoulder, preparing to rip her dress, Lisa didn't scream in fear. She screamed in rage. The transformation didn't follow the normal, fluid shift of a modern werewolf. It was violently explosive. Bones cracked like gunshots. The rogue was thrown back 10 feet by the sheer kinetic force of her shifting mass. When Lisa stood, she wasn't the sleek, silver-gray wolf David had known. She kept growing. 7 feet, then 8. Her fur wasn't gray, it was an abyssal, light-consuming black. Her muscles were corded steel, her claws like obsidian daggers. She was a Lycan, a genetic throwback to the primordial apex predators of their kind. The two rogue wolves froze, their instincts screaming at them to flee. They had thought they were cornering a broken Luna. They had just awakened a nightmare. Lisa lunged. She didn't fight with the choreographed grace of royal training. She fought with absolute, devastating butchery. She caught the first wolf by the throat, her jaws clamping down with the force of a hydraulic press. A sickening crunch echoed over the river, and she tossed the lifeless body aside like a rag doll. The second wolf bolted, whining in terror. Lisa was faster. She pinned him beneath her massive paws, her jaws inches from his spine. The one-eyed leader, scrambling backward in the mud, was trembling violently. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the primal, shivering terror of a prey animal. Lisa shifted back to her human form. The transition was instantaneous. She stood naked in the freezing rain, her skin unblemished, the cold not affecting her in the slightest. Her eyes, once a soft hazel, now glowed with a terrifying, luminescent gold. She walked slowly toward the trembling rogue leader. She grabbed him by the hair, forcing his head back, exposing his throat. "Who is the king of the Deadlands?" Her voice echoed, layered with a monstrous, vibrating undertone. No one," the rogue stammered, weeping. "It's fractured. Warlords, scavengers." Lisa tilted her head, the rain washing the blood from her face. "Not anymore," she whispered. She released his hair. "Submit or die." The rogue didn't hesitate. He rolled onto his stomach, pressing his neck firmly into the mud at her bare feet. "Alpha," he whimpered. "No," Lisa said, looking out at the vast, dark expanse of the wasteland. "Queen." 2 years was a blink of an eye to an immortal bloodline. But in the Deadlands, 2 years was enough time to forge an empire out of blood and iron. Lisa sat on a throne carved directly into the basalt rock of a hollowed-out mountain. She wore dark, fitted leathers, a heavy cloak of white wolf fur. claimed from a northern warlord who had foolishly challenged her rule. Draped over her left shoulder, the throne room of the obsidian crest was not adorned with gold or tapestries like David's palace. It was lit by roaring fire pits, decorated with the banners of the 30 rogue factions she had conquered, broken and assimilated into the most lethal army the continent had ever seen. She was no longer Lysa, the gentle Luna. She was the Nightmare Queen. Her pack, the Blood Iron, was spoken of in terrified whispers across the civilized territories. Kyle, her second in command, stepped into the firelight. He was the one-eyed rogue from the riverbank 2 years ago, now clean, disciplined, and fiercely, fanatically loyal to her. He wore the blackened armor of her elite guard. "My queen," Kyle said, bowing low. He never looked her directly in the eye unless ordered. The sheer weight of her Lycan aura was too oppressive. The scouts report activity on the southern border. The Silvermane pack has crossed the Bloodwash River. Lisa's expression remained entirely impassive. Inside, a cold, dark amusement began to coil. "Have they come to wage war, Kale?" "No. They sent a diplomatic envoy under a white banner. They've established a camp 10 miles from the fortress. They are demanding an audience with the warlord of the north." Kyle sneered. "They complain that our patrols are choking their trade routes. They want a treaty, or as they put it, they wish to offer us the privilege of bending the knee to Alpha King David." A low, collective growl echoed through the cavernous hall from the 50 elite guards flanking the walls. The very mention of the Silvermane King demanding their submission was an insult paid in blood. Lysa raised a single hand. The hall fell instantly, deathly silent. "David has grown greedy," Lysa murmured, her voice smooth as glass, carrying effortlessly through the massive chamber. "He expanded east, and now he looks north, thinking he deals with disorganized scavengers." "Shall I send them back their heads, my queen?" Kale asked eagerly. "No," Lysa said, standing up. The movement was fluid, lethal. "That is too quick. Let them in. Bring the envoy to the Great Hall." An hour later, the massive iron doors of the keep groaned open. Lysa remained seated on her throne, the upper half of her face shadowed by the dim lighting of the cavern. The Silvermane envoy walked in. There were 5 of them, dressed in pristine, arrogant silver and white uniforms. Leading them was a face Lysa knew intimately. Marcus, the same royal guard who had stood in the hallway the night her heart was ripped out. Marcus looked older, a heavy scar across his cheek, but his posture was still dripping with the entitlement of a Silvermane elite. Marcus stopped at the base of the dais, refusing to bow. He looked up at the shadowed figure on the throne. "I speak for David, Alpha King of the Silvermane pack, ruler of the southern and eastern territories," Marcus declared, his voice echoing off the stone. "We do not recognize the legitimacy of the Blood Iron pack. However, my king is merciful. If you withdraw your forces from the Bloodwash border and offer a tribute of iron and pelt, we will allow you to exist in the wastelands, unbothered." Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The Blood Iron guards around the room didn't move a muscle, but the killing intent rolling off them made the Silvermane envoys shift nervously. Slowly, Lysa leaned forward, moving out of the shadows and into the flickering orange light of the braziers. Marcus's speech died in his throat. His eyes snapped wide, all the color draining from his face in a sickening rush. He staggered back a step, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword, not out of aggression, but out of sheer, unadulterated terror. He recognized the face, but the eyes. The terrifying, glowing gold eyes and the crushing, suffocating aura radiating from her were entirely alien. My, Marcus stammered, his knees buckling under the pressure of her aura. He hit the stone floor, his arrogance shattered into dust. Luna? That title, Lisa said, her voice dropping into the monstrous, vibrating hum of her Lycan blood. Died in the dirt 2 years ago. She stood, descending the first 2 steps of the dais. The Silvermane guards behind Marcus fell to their knees, physically forced down by the oppressive weight of her power. You will return to David, Lisa commanded softly. Yet the words struck them like physical blows. You will tell him that the North bows to no king, and you will tell him that the Queen accepts his invitation to the upcoming Continental Summit. Lisa smiled, a cold, sharp expression that made Marcus tremble violently. Tell my sister I look forward to seeing her. The glass in David's hand shattered, amber liquor raining down onto the polished mahogany desk. Say that again, the Alpha King commanded. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that rattled the crystal decanters on the shelves of his private study. Marcus remained on one knee, his head bowed. He hadn't stopped trembling since he crossed back over the Bloodwash River. The warlord of the North, the ruler of the Blood Iron Pack. It is Lisa, my king. She is not dead. She is their queen. David stared at his elite guard, a heavy, suffocating silence descending over the room. Behind him, lounging on a velvet chaise, Elena abruptly sat up. The silk robe slipped off her shoulder, but for once she didn't bother to adjust it for David's gaze. Her face was pale, her dark eyes wide with a frantic, buzzing panic. That's impossible, Elena snapped, her voice shrill, lacking entirely the smooth, commanding resonance a true Luna should possess. A rejected mate doesn't survive 48 hours, let alone 2 years in the Deadlands. And she certainly doesn't conquer the rogue factions. She was weak. She was a diplomat, not a fighter. You are mistaken, Marcus, David said, wiping the liquor from his hand with a cloth. He forced his heart rate to slow, projecting an aura of absolute control, though a cold dread had begun to pool in his stomach. It is a trick, a rogue warlord using her name to mock us. Marcus finally looked up. The deep scar on his cheek twitched. It was her, sire. But she was changed. Her eyes were gold. The aura she projected brought us to our knees. We couldn't breathe. My king, with all due respect, it felt heavier than yours. David's jaw locked. The implication was treasonous, but the sheer, raw terror in his best soldier's eyes silenced his reprimand. She said she accepts your invitation to the Continental Summit, Marcus whispered. She told me to tell her sister she looks forward to seeing her. Elena swallowed hard, her hand instinctively drifting to her throat. For 2 years, she had worn the crown. She shared the king's bed. But the elders still whispered. She had yet to produce the strong, prime heir David had sacrificed his mate Bond for. The pack tolerated her, but they did not revere her. The ghost of Lisa's gentle, steady rule had haunted the Silvermane halls like a persistent frost. Now, that ghost was coming to the summit. 2 weeks later, the Continental Summit convened at the Solstice Keep, a massive, neutral fortress built into the side of the continent's tallest mountain peak. It was a place of ancient truce, where the alphas of the 4 major territories gathered every decade to negotiate borders, trade, and alliances. The Great Hall was a masterpiece of vaulted stone and roaring hearths. A massive circular table of ancient oak dominated the center, surrounded by heavy, high-backed chairs. David sat at the southern point, flanked by Elena and his top generals. He wore his formal regalia, projecting an air of untouchable supremacy. Yet, His eyes kept darting to the empty chair directly across from him, the seat reserved for the Northern Territory, a seat that had been empty for a century. The heavy oak doors of the great hall groaned. The low murmur of the gathered alphas died instantly. The air in the room changed. It wasn't just a drop in temperature, it was a shift in atmospheric pressure. The ambient chatter of the fire seemed to mute itself. A scent rolled into the hall, not the soft, rain-washed pine Lisa used to carry, but the scent of deep, ancient earth, crushed ozone, and sharp, metallic iron. It was the scent of an apex predator. Lisa stepped over the threshold. The collective breath of the room hitched. She wore no crown, no elaborate silks. She was clad in a tailored suit of charcoal and black, the cut sharp and severe, with a heavy cloak of white wolf fur draped over her shoulders. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe braid, exposing the sharp, striking angles of her face. But it was her eyes that paralyzed the room. They weren't hazel. They were a brilliant, glowing gold, radiating an ancient, violent power. Beside her walked Kale, his single eye scanning the room with the lethal precision of a hunting hound. David's hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly the wood groaned. His heart slammed against his ribs. It was her, the mate he had broken, the woman he had discarded to secure his lineage. But the creature walking toward the table wasn't his broken mate. It was a deity of war. Lisa didn't look at him. She didn't look at Elena, who had shrunk back into her chair, her face drained of all blood. Lisa simply walked to the empty northern chair, pulled it out, and sat down. She rested her hands on the table, the silver rings on her fingers catching the firelight. She looked around the circle, her golden eyes lingering on the most powerful wolves on the continent, before finally settling on David. "I apologize for the delay," Lisa said, her voice smooth, carrying that terrifying, vibrational undertone that made the hair on the back of David's neck stand up. The North had a pest problem at the border, but the blood iron pack is present. Let us begin. The first hour of the summit was an agonizing exercise in psychological endurance. Alpha Thorn of the Western Ridges, a massive, scarred man who respected only brute strength, was the first to test the waters. He leaned forward, squinting at Lisa. The North has been a fractured wasteland for generations. By what right does a rejected Silvermane Luna claim a seat at this table? The insult was deliberate. Beside David, Elena smirked, recovering a fraction of her usual arrogance. She leaned closer to David, her shoulder brushing his, a territorial display meant for Lisa to see. Lisa didn't react to the display. She slowly turned her golden gaze to Thorn. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she stand. She simply allowed a fraction of her Lycan aura to bleed into the room. The hearth fires suddenly flickered and dimmed. A crushing physical weight pressed down on the alphas. Thorn's breath hitched, his eyes going wide as his wolf violently submitted beneath his skin, whining in absolute terror. "I'm by the right of conquest, Alpha Thorn," Lisa said, her voice a calm, freezing river. "I hold the North because I killed every warlord who said I couldn't. I did not come here to ask for your recognition. I came to inform you of my borders. Cross them, and I will hang your pelts from my fortress walls." She pulled the aura back. The fires roared to life again. Thorn swallowed hard, averting his eyes, his dominance utterly shattered in less than 10 seconds. David watched, entirely mesmerized and deeply unsettled. The mate bond they had shared was dead. She had severed it flawlessly. Yet, looking at her, he felt a phantom ache in his chest, a hollow, gaping wound that had never truly closed. He had traded her for a stronger lineage, but staring at the terrifying, regal power radiating from her now, he realized the colossal magnitude of his mistake. Elena's wolf was prime, yes, but Lisa's bloodline was something out of legend. "Let us discuss trade routes," David interrupted, his voice slightly louder than necessary, desperate to reclaim control of the room. "The Southern Pack proposes a unified tariff on all goods passing through the central riverways. The North rejects the tariff," Lisa stated smoothly, not missing a beat. David's jaw tightened. "The North relies on Southern grain. You are in no position to reject." "We were," Lisa corrected, "until I secured an exclusive trade agreement with the Eastern Packs. We bypass your riverways entirely." David froze. He looked at Alpha Corin of the East, a man he had considered a staunch ally. Corin refused to meet David's eyes, staring intently at his water goblet. "Corin?" David demanded, his alpha command bleeding into his tone. "Explain." Corin cleared his throat nervously. "Queen Lisa's terms were highly favorable, David, and she holds the Northern Iron Mines. We needed the metal." Elena, sensing David's humiliation, foolishly decided to intervene. "This is absurd," she snapped, standing up. "You are using dirty politics to avenge a personal grudge, Lisa. You're holding the continent's economy hostage because you couldn't keep a man in your bed." The entire room went dead silent. The alphas stared at Elena as if she had just decided to juggle lit dynamite. Lisa slowly turned her head to look at her sister. For the first time since she entered the room, Lisa smiled. It was a terrifying, chilling expression. "Elena," Lisa said, her voice dripping with a lethal, patronizing sweetness. "You are speaking at a table of alphas. Who gave the concubine permission to address the council?" Elena gasped, her face flushing crimson. "I am the Luna of the Silvermane." "Are you?" Lisa tilted her head. "I smell fear. I smell insecurity. But I don't smell the respect of your pack. You wear the crown I left on the floor, Elena. Do not mistake wearing my leftovers for holding my power. Sit down before I make you kneel." The command wasn't a suggestion. A microscopic pulse of Lycan dominance shot across the table. Elena's legs gave out. She collapsed hard into her chair, gasping for air, her hands trembling violently. David surged to his feet, his own alpha aura roaring to life, furious at the public humiliation of his mate. "Watch your tone, Lisa," he snarled. Lisa didn't stand. She merely looked up at him, her golden eyes pinning him to the spot. "Or what, David? You will strip me of a title I already discarded? Keep your dog on a leash, or I will put her down." The summit broke for the evening, the tension in the great hall so thick it could be cut with a silver blade. Lisa stood on one of the keep's sweeping stone balconies, letting the freezing alpine wind bite at her face. The cold was a comfort. It reminded her of the night she survived the Bloodwash River. Below, the sprawling camps of the various packs dotted the valley, their fires glowing like fallen stars. She heard the heavy, measured footsteps before he even opened the glass doors. The scent of pine and rain reached her, laced heavily with anxiety and regret. "You always did prefer the cold," David said, stepping out onto the balcony. He closed the doors behind him, ensuring they were alone. Lisa didn't turn around. She kept her hands resting lightly on the stone balustrade. "You shouldn't be here, David. If your breeder finds out you sought me out in the dark, she might throw a tantrum." David grimaced, stepping closer. "Don't call her that. She is your sister. She ceased being my sister the moment she climbed into our bed." Lisa replied flatly, finally turning to face him. Up close, without the buffer of the council table, The physical changes in Lisa were even more staggering to David. She was taller, the latent Lycan genetics having rewritten her bone structure. But it was the cold emptiness in her gaze that hurt him the most. Where there was once absolute, unconditional love, there was now only the calculating stare of a predator assessing prey. "Why are you doing this, Lisa?" David asked, his voice softening, attempting to use the intimate, pleading tone that had always worked on her in the past. "I know I hurt you, but you must understand the pressure I was under. The elders were threatening to challenge my rule if I didn't produce an heir. It was politics. It was survival. It was a choice," Lisa corrected, her voice void of any emotion. "And I have no interest in your excuses. I am not here for revenge, David. Revenge is an emotion, and you are no longer worth my emotions." "Then why come?" he demanded, frustration leaking into his tone. He stepped closer, attempting to crowd her space, instinctively trying to assert physical dominance. "Why choke my trade routes? Why publicly humiliate Elena? You want me back. You want to prove you're strong enough to be my queen." Lisa actually laughed. It was a dark, melodic sound that chilled him to the bone. "Your queen," she echoed, stepping forward. She didn't retreat from his attempt at intimidation. She matched it, her golden eyes blazing. "David, you still think entirely too small." She reached into her coat and pulled out a rolled piece of heavy parchment, sealed with 3 different wax insignias. She pressed it flat against David's chest. He reflexively took it, unfurling it in the moonlight. His eyes scanned the document. His breath caught. "The treaty you sent me to negotiate with the Eastern Pax 2 years ago," Lisa whispered, stepping close enough that he could feel the terrifying heat radiating off her skin. "The one I secured the day I came home to find you with Elena. You never actually read the fine print, did you?" David read the words, his face draining of color. The treaty hadn't bound the East to the Silvermane King. It had bound them to the Silvermane Luna, to the diplomat who forged it, to Lisa. "When I rejected you," Lisa explained, her voice a soft, venomous purr, "the treaty defaulted to me personally. Alpha Corin hasn't been your ally for 2 years, David. He has been my spy. He has been funneling your pack's financial reserves into northern investments under my command." David looked up, sheer disbelief masking his handsome features. You bankrupted my pack?" "I quietly annexed it," Lisa corrected. "Your generals haven't been paid their full stipends in 6 months. Your borders are weak. And tomorrow, at the final session of the summit, the Western Ridges will announce their alignment with the North. They respect power, David, and you just proved today that you have none." David stumbled back a step, the parchment shaking in his hands. The man who had sacrificed his soulmate for the sake of an empire realized he had lost both in the same stroke. "You engineered a coup," he breathed, staring at her as if looking at a stranger. "I secured my lineage." Lisa mocked his words from 2 years ago flawlessly. "You are surrounded, David. Your economy is mine. Your allies are mine. You have one option left." "I will never submit to you," he snarled, his wolf clawing at the surface, desperate and cornered. "You won't have to," Lisa said, turning back to the view of the mountains. "Tomorrow, you will abdicate the throne of the Silvermane. You will hand the crown to a general of my choosing. If you do, I will allow you and Elena to leave the territory with your lives. If you refuse..." She looked back over her shoulder, her golden eyes gleaming with the promise of absolute destruction. I will unleash the blood iron on your palace, and I will burn your legacy to ash. The morning of the final summit session dawned gray and bitterly cold. Inside the Silvermane Royal Pavilion, the atmosphere was poisonous. Elena paced the length of the Persian rug, chewing furiously on her thumbnail, the manicured polish chipped and ruined. She looked hideous. The lack of sleep and the suffocating terror of Lisa's presence had aged her 5 years in a single night. "You cannot abdicate," Elena hissed, rounding on David. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head buried in his hands. He hadn't slept, nor had he changed out of the clothes from the previous night. "If you step down, what happens to me? I am the Luna. I am carrying the future of the Silvermane." David slowly lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot, hollowed out by the crushing weight of his monumental failure. "There is no Silvermane, Elena. Not anymore. I spent the entire night going over the ledgers with the scribes." Lisa wasn't bluffing. Alpha Corin routed all our emergency reserves into a dummy trade syndicate based in the north. We can't even pay the soldiers guarding this tent. "Then we fight!" Elena shrieked, her voice cracking. "You are the Alpha King. Challenge her to single combat. The ancient laws demand she accept." David looked at the woman he had traded his soulmate for. The realization of how utterly foolish and small-minded she was hit him with a sickening wave of nausea. "Fight her?" he echoed, his voice devoid of hope. "Did you not feel the aura she projected in that room, Elena? She is a Lycan, a true, ancient Lycan. If I challenge her, she won't just beat me. She will tear my head from my shoulders in front of the entire continent." He stood up, adjusting his tunic with trembling hands. "We are going to the Great Hall. I will name General Marcus as regent. We will take whatever gold we have left and leave for the Southern Isles." Elena stared at him, aghast. "You're a coward." "I am surviving," David snapped. A brief flash of his old alpha temper flaring before dying out just as quickly. "Get dressed. We have a surrender to make." When they entered the Great Hall an hour later, the silence was deafening. The massive oak table was already seated. Lisa sat at the northern point, clad in a stunning high-collared gown of black velvet, the white fur cloak draped elegantly over her shoulders. She looked every inch an empress. Kyle stood perfectly still behind her right shoulder. As David took his seat at the southern point, he realized the geography of the room had shifted. Alpha Thorn of the West had moved his chair. He was no longer seated on David's flank. He had moved closer to the northern side of the table. Alpha Corin of the East refused to even look at David, his eyes fixed firmly on Lisa with absolute reverence. "The final session of the Continental Summit is hereby open," Lisa announced. Her voice was calm, yet it carried that terrifying vibrational power that commanded the marrow of everyone's bones to listen. "We have much to finalize. Alpha Thorn, I believe you had an announcement." Thorn, the massive brute who had mocked Lisa the day before, stood up. He bowed his head respectfully to her. "The Western Ridges formally recognize Queen Lisa of the Blood Iron as the High Sovereign of the continent. We bind our borders to hers. The West stands with the North." A collective gasp swept through the gallery of lesser alphas and generals observing from the outer ring of the hall. David closed his eyes. It was done. The continent was unified, and he was entirely cut out of it. "General Marcus," Lisa said, her golden eyes shifting to the elite guard standing behind David's chair. "Step forward." Marcus hesitated, looking down at David. When David offered no resistance, Marcus stepped up to the edge of the table. David has informed me that the Silvermane treasury is empty, Lysa said, her tone conversational, yet loud enough for every ear in the keep to catch. The murmurs in the gallery erupted into shocked whispers. Your king has bankrupted your people to fund his lavish lifestyle and his concubine's wardrobe, while your soldiers go underfed. Is this true? Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked at David, a man he had bled for, a man who now stared at the table in defeat. It has been difficult to secure supplies, my queen. I am assuming the Silvermane debt, Lysa declared. As of this morning, a caravan of northern grain and eastern timber is en route to your capital. Your soldiers will be paid double their owed stipends by nightfall. Marcus's eyes widened. He immediately dropped to one knee, bowing his head deeply. The Silvermane army thanks you, Sovereign. Stand up, Marcus, Lysa commanded gently, because your king has a final order of business. All eyes turned to David. The silence stretched tight, ready to snap. David stood up slowly. His hands gripped the edge of the oak table. He opened his mouth to speak the words of abdication, to willingly surrender the crown he had sacrificed everything to keep. But before he could utter a single syllable, Elena shattered the quiet. No! Elena screamed, vaulting out of her chair. She lunged toward the center of the room, her face contorted in an ugly, desperate mask of pure fury. She pointed a shaking finger at Lysa. You are a fraud, a rejected barren failure. I invoke the right of blood. I challenge you for the crown of the Silvermane. The great hall erupted into chaos. Several alphas leaped to their feet. Kyle immediately stepped forward, his hand dropping to the hilt of his broadsword, his single eye narrowing with lethal intent. Lysa merely raised 2 fingers. Kyle stopped instantly, stepping back into the shadows. David scrambled forward, grabbing Elena's arm, his eyes wide with terror. Elena, shut up! Are you insane? You can't challenge her. Let me go! Elena shrieked, clawing at David's face. She was completely unhinged, the reality of losing her status breaking her fragile psyche. She shoved David away and shifted. The transformation was fast, fueled by adrenaline and panic. In seconds, a prime, silver-furred wolf stood on the stone floor, snarling viciously at the northern side of the table. She bared her teeth, digging her claws into the ancient stone, preparing to launch herself at Lysa's throat. Lysa didn't stand up. She didn't shift. She simply leaned back in her chair and locked eyes with her sister's wolf. The golden rings in Lysa's irises flared, burning with the intensity of a dying star. She unleashed her Lycan aura. It wasn't a warning pulse like the day before. It was a localized, concentrated sledgehammer of primordial dominance. The air pressure in the center of the room dropped so violently that several water goblets shattered on the table. Elena's wolf froze mid-snarl. The terrifying, ancient power slammed into her nervous system. It bypassed her physical strength entirely, attacking the very genetic code of her wolf. Elena hit the stone floor as if she had been dropped from a great height. She didn't just submit, she was physically crushed by the pressure, her belly pressed flat against the cold stone, a high-pitched, pathetic whine escaping her throat. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move a single muscle. David, witnessing his mate being suffocated by sheer willpower, roared in anguish. Instinct overrode his logic. He shifted, his massive, dark-furred alpha wolf bursting forth, tearing through his royal garments. He lunged across the space, intending to break Lysa's line of sight and save Elena. Lysa finally stood. She moved with a speed that defied physics. Before David's wolf could even clear the distance to the table, Lysa was there. She didn't fully transform, but her hands elongated, her nails sharpening into obsidian talons, and the bones in her face shifted, adopting the sharp, predatory angles of the Lycan. She caught the Alpha King in midair, her hand wrapped around David's throat, arresting a 600-pound wolf's momentum instantly. The stone floor cracked beneath her boots as she absorbed the impact without yielding an inch. With a sickening thud, she slammed David back down into the ground, pinning him by the throat with a single arm. Her golden eyes burned down into his terrified, widened gaze. "You threw me to the Deadlands," Lysa whispered, her voice echoing in the dead silent hall, a monstrous, vibrating purr that made the surrounding alphas hold their breath. "You broke my soul for a crown you couldn't even keep. I survived the rot. I conquered the monsters. And now, you dare bare your teeth at me?" David whined, thrashing wildly, but her grip was like a vice of solid steel. He couldn't break it. The Alpha King, the most feared warrior in the South, was entirely helpless. Lysa tightened her grip just enough to cut off his air, watching the panic set in. "Abdicate," she commanded, the Lycan frequency in her voice vibrating against his skull. "Or I will sever your head and use it as a centerpiece for tonight's feast." David's wolf went limp. He tapped the floor with his paw, a frantic, desperate gesture of absolute surrender. Lysa held him for 2 more agonizing seconds, ensuring the humiliation was thoroughly seared into his memory before throwing him aside. She stepped back, her features seamlessly returning to their flawless human state. She wiped her hands together, brushing off the invisible dirt. "General Marcus," Lysa said, turning her back on the whimpering, defeated forms of David and Elena. "Take them." The heavy iron gates of the Solstice Keep groaned open, revealing the bitter, biting winds of the northern mountain pass. David and Elena stood in the snow. They were shivering violently. They had been stripped of their royal silks and armor, dressed only in the coarse woolen tunics of common criminals. Elena was weeping silently, her arms wrapped around herself, her spirit entirely broken. David stared blankly ahead, a hollow shell of the arrogant king who had ruled just days prior. Behind them stood Marcus and a contingent of blood-iron guards. Lysa walked out onto the stone drawbridge, wrapped in her white fur cloak, immune to the freezing wind. Kael walked beside her, carrying a small, heavy sack. David slowly turned to look at her. The hatred in his eyes had been entirely replaced by a profound, agonizing regret. He realized now that the woman standing before him, strong, brilliant, and unbreakable, was the true prize. He had traded a diamond for a handful of ash. "Where will we go?" David asked, his voice hoarse, broken by the physical damage to his throat and the absolute destruction of his pride. "East," Lysa replied smoothly, "over the Bloodwash River." Elena's head snapped up, her face pale with fresh horror. "No, the Deadlands. Lysa, please, you can't. We'll die out there." "I didn't," Lysa said, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "You claimed you were the stronger Luna, Elena. Now is your chance to prove it." She nodded to Kael. He stepped forward and tossed the heavy sack onto the snow at David's feet. It clinked with the sound of a few silver coins and basic hunting supplies. "Consider that a parting gift," Lysa said. "More than you gave me when I crossed that river. Do not ever cross back into my territories. If my patrols find you on this side of the Bloodwash, they have orders to kill you on sight." David looked down at the sack, the reality of his new existence settling over him like a suffocating shroud. He was an exile, a rogue, the very thing he used to hunt for sport. He slowly dropped to his knees in the snow, bowing his head to the woman he should have cherished. "Forgive me, Lysa," he whispered, a single tear freezing on his cheek. Lysa looked at him, feeling nothing. The phantom ache in her chest that had plagued her for 2 years was finally gone. Cauterized by the truth, "There is nothing left to forgive, David," she said softly. "You are nothing to me." She turned around and walked back into the keep. The heavy iron gates slammed shut with a deafening finality, echoing across the mountains. Hours later, the great hall was warm, filled with the murmur of a unified council. The map of the continent lay spread across the ancient oak table. There were no longer borders drawn in red ink separating the north, south, east, and west. Lysa sat at the head of the table. General Marcus, now serving as the regent of the southern province, sat quietly, taking notes. Alpha Corin and Alpha Thorn were locked in a heated but respectful debate over a new aqueduct system. Kale poured her a goblet of dark wine, a rare smile touching his scarred face. "The roads are secure, my queen. The trade routes are open." Lysa took the goblet, her golden eyes reflecting the roaring fire of the hearth. She had lost a mate, but she had gained a kingdom. She had been thrown to the wolves, and she had returned, leading the pack. She raised the goblet, taking a slow sip. The Alpha King was a ghost in the wasteland. The Lycan Queen had risen, and her reign would last for 1,000 years. Lysa's journey from a discarded, broken mate to the undisputed high sovereign of the werewolf world proves that true power isn't granted by a crown. It is forged in the fires of survival. By refusing to break under the weight of David and Elena's betrayal, Lysa unlocked her ancient potential, proving that the most fatal mistake an alpha can make is underestimating the Luna he threw away. Her empire, built on strength, logic, and fierce justice, stands as a testament to her unbreakable will. Did you enjoy this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate triumph? If so, please like this post, share it with your fellow fantasy romance fans, and subscribe for more cinematic, high-stakes werewolf dramas and dramatic fiction. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Lysa's epic revenge.